Olá, pessoal, bem-vindas, bem-vindos à terceira temporada da AYAOn. Estamos muito felizes de estar de volta aqui com vocês. Eu sou Patricia Ellen, cofundadora da AYA e presidente do Instituto AYA. Estamos aqui com vocês para trazer sempre soluções para uma economia de baixo carbono. Nós trabalhamos sempre com modelo de impacto positivo, onde nós mostramos que é possível ter modelos de negócios e econômicos que sejam positivos para as pessoas, para as florestas e para a economia. Hoje, em especial, é um dia muito importante para a gente. Primeiro, nós estamos voltando na terceira temporada com 4 episódios especiais acontecendo dentro do Fórum Ambição 2030. É um evento que nós estamos fazendo em parceria com o Pacto Global da ONU. Estamos fazendo uma nova edição e vamos aproveitar este evento tão importante, onde nós estamos exatamente discutindo o que nós podemos fazer para acelerar o cumprimento dos Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, para descarbonizar a economia e termos um planeta mais próspero e mais inclusivo para todas as pessoas. O primeiro episódio é especial porque nós temos Paul Polman conosco. Todos eles vão ser incríveis, mas aqui, essa honra de entrevistar o Paul, vou contar por que é especial. O Paul publicou um livro que em inglês chama Net Positive e em português chama Impacto Positivo. Ele foi CEO da Unilever, da Nestlé, da Procter Gamble, trabalhou em várias áreas, é um líder empresarial, também ativista do clima e das desigualdades. Holandês de origem, brasileiro de coração. E no livro, ele ensina para a gente como empresas corajosas prosperam dando mais do que tiram. O episódio eu vou mudar já para inglês, vai ter tradução aqui para vocês, mas, de novo, manifesto aqui a minha alegria. Paul, muito bem-vindo. É uma honra ter você aqui com a gente.
Well, thanks for being here, Patricia. I was looking forward to it. Just a wonderful program of AYAOn.
Yes, when Paul heard about the name of AYAOn, because he knows AYA so well, Paul works with us as an investor at Systemic and has been helping us a lot here in Brazil, but he's also helping us a lot with AYA. So when he heard about the podcast at AYAOn, he found it very innovative, and we took the opportunity to invite you, of course.
Thanks.
But Paul is a special mentor to me as well, and you know, you are a leader that I admire a lot for many reasons. It's hard to describe all the reasons here, but I would love to have the opportunity to listen a little bit more about your personal journey. I know you've been traveling a lot as an activist, as a private sector leader. So could you share a little bit about your journey and what took you so far away here to Brazil?
Well, I've been very lucky on my journey that is continuing and my developments continue. I think my journey is decided a little bit by the help of a lot of people. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here by probably making a lot of mistakes along the way, but learning from it, a certain level of hard work and probably the right mindset. I was born in 1956. I always thought it was a long time after World War II. It was actually very close the older I get. And my parents were deprived of education because of the war. My father was 15 when the war started, so they went high school, they went university, never had an opportunity. So he worked in a factory and worked himself up as much as he could. But we had 6 children at home, and I'm number 2 out of 6. And the main purpose of my parents was to have peace in Europe, have the communities work, be sure that we got a better chance or opportunity in life than they had had, especially as far as education was concerned. I was very lucky that my mother, who recently passed on, unfortunately, at the tender age of 92, was a teacher before she had to attend to all the children and the family things. But she insisted on education. And then being born in the Netherlands was lucky because, you know, we had a certain amount of access to the right food and the right sanitation, but also education. It's the Dutch government that pays. So I first wanted to be a priest, to be honest.
You wanted to be a priest?
I wanted to be a priest. That's
wow.
the big secret of the podcast. I actually studied for priest for a while.
Wow.
And because I was I always felt, looking at my parents, that having a life where you give more than you take is actually a good life. And a lot of people think greed is good, but generosity wins over time. And so the principle of a mindset of putting yourself to the service of others was, for us, a natural thing to do in the family I grew up in. And it always comes back in many multiple ways. So then I wanted to be a doctor. I thought that was a good profession, but in Holland, the government limits the number of places because they pay for it. And it's a lottery system, and I missed the lottery. So my father made clear that I had to do something to make a living, that he couldn't support me for the rest of his life. So I went into business, economics at that time, studied economics in the Netherlands. Wasn't very motivated, I have to say, because it wasn't my choice. It was more of an excuse than anything else. And so my father then said, why don't you go to the US? His company that he worked for was bought up by an American company called Goodrich, the tire company. And he had arranged to do an internship in the US in Akron, Ohio. So he said, go there and learn about business, improve your language skills, and all makes sense. And then perhaps you like business. So I said, I don't know. So I went to the US, but when I arrived, I was young and not very decisive, perhaps. Didn't want to go to Akron, Ohio. So I went around the universities there and ended up at the University of Cincinnati. And very quickly, actually, I met my future wife there. We got married in 1979, so we're celebrating our 45 years this year. But so that was a good reason to stay. And so I did my MBA there in business. I did my master's in economics at the same time. And the reason I could stay there was, again, someone believed in me. I didn't have a visa in those days. I was there on a tourist visa. I didn't have any money. The US was very, very expensive in the end 70s. But someone believed in me, the head of the economics department. And he said, well, if you start teaching Paul Samuelson 101, if you get straight A's in your courses, if you pass all the tests, like test of English as a foreign language and all the other things, then we'll give you a scholarship. So that's what I did, worked day and night. Had to work in maintenance in a building, had to do some other things to just make my living. And the rest is a little bit history. Then in Cincinnati, I joined P&G, Procter Gamble. That's their main headquarter. So it wasn't very far in a sense. And I was very lucky that they offered me a job. Had a career of 27 years in Procter Gamble. Ended up being the group president of our international business. Then I decided at that time, I was about 50, and everybody gets the normal crisis in life of what do I do? And my wife and I had started a big foundation, and I wanted to spend more time on that. So I said, enough with corporate life, enough with bureaucracy, enough with politics. I want to do something that gives me a more fulfilling life. But then Nestlé called, and at that time I was living in Geneva. So Nestlé called, and after a long discussion, I ended up going there as the chief financial officer and also being responsible for the Americas, because I like to run businesses. Did that for 3 years, and Unilever called and said, do you want to come to us and be the CEO? And for a little bit more than 10 years, I worked for that wonderful company and tried to apply a little bit my own beliefs, but also found a company that was based on very strong values, a long history. That was probably a little bit sleepy at the time, but we could wake that up and unlock that full potential. And that was a fun journey. But after 10 years, I thought, it's good to give other people a chance to get fresh thinking in, to not let a company be characterized by a person. And I felt myself I could have a bigger influence to move away from this formal authority or bought authority that you sometimes have when you run some of these biggest companies in the world, but move into an uncharted territory that I call a moral authority. It's more difficult, but it's more fun and more effective if you do that. And that's what I'm doing now. How do you accelerate the implementation of what we call the Sustainable Development Goals, which I helped develop and I'm very passionate about, and how to work on the intersection of business, civil society, and governments to do that.
Wow, what a trajectory. And you know, aside from our common passion for a net zero, net positive economy, we have a few things in common too that I didn't know. We talk a lot about business and about how to change the world, but my
We
family.
both have wonderful children.
But my parents didn't go to high school either. And my mom grew up in an orphanage, and there the nuns took care of this foster care place. So I really liked the nuns because to me, that was the way, you know, my mom was there. And I was very grateful to them. So as a kid, I used to go there as well. So I took some courses, technical, vocational course with them. And I actually wanted to be a nun until I was 15 years old. And
I'm
then,
glad you didn't.
then I went into business. It was the same. And my parents wanted me to become a doctor. So for then, I had to study law or I would or become a doctor in healthcare. But then I decided to go to business because I was passionate and I really wanted to study economics, management. But it's quite interesting to hear your story. I didn't know that.
Similarities. That is amazing.
But given that aside from all these stories, we share this common purpose on this net zero transition, you are a very well known and admired private sector leader. How do you imagine that the role of the private sector leaders and the CEOs specifically could look like for us to really make all these changes in the economy become a reality, especially in what would help us to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy?
Yeah, well, that's important. And I'm glad you mentioned the CEO because I don't think at the end any of these transitions will work at the speed and scale that we need them if the CEOs of companies are not fully behind it. And there's still a lot of work to do in that respect. But what is very clear is that our current linear extractive consumption model or production model, if you want to call it, is running out of steam. When the world had only 3 to 4 billion people, when our consumption levels were very low compared to what they are today, we could cope with it because Mother Earth was able to compensate.
Yeah.
Our surplus carbon emissions, especially after the Industrial Revolution, that was absorbed by the oceans, by the forests, by the land. And, the pollution that went into the rivers was diluted by the abundance of natural resources we have. Unfortunately, our economic success has also been our biggest enemy.
Yeah.
Our population growth has accelerated that. So we're in a situation that the pressure on the Earth's resources are more than Mother Earth can carry by itself. In Brazil, for example, last year in 2023, World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish, was actually August the 2nd.
Yeah.
And what that means is that after August the 2nd, every day after, we're actually stealing from future generations. Yeah. So our current system is unsustainable.
You know that the only year in the last 10 years that we managed to go backwards in the overshoot day was with COVID.
Yeah, it was COVID.
Yeah, that to me was so intriguing that we stopped, right? But
that's not the solution.
Yes,
to stop
unfortunately,
all the economies
yes.
and repeat the COVID. But
yes.
it was at least it showed us what could be done.
Yes,
how
exactly.
we could work together on a common challenge.
And showed clearly our effect on Earth as well, right? 100%. Because when we stopped, we went backwards. But
also to see how quickly nature could come back.
Yeah.
How if we are faced with a burning problem that affects
true.
our future, we can react quickly, work together in partnership.
That's true.
Across boundaries. And that pause of COVID was actually good. It made people also realize that we can't have an infinite growth on a finite planet. And anything you can do forever is by definition unsustainable. So companies have a big role to play because companies actually make up the biggest part of the economy. If you look at the top 100 companies, they are bigger than most of the countries in the world.
It's crazy.
It's absolutely, and that is the case in nearly any country that we operate in. So companies provide innovation. They have resources. They have people. They have often a longer-term outlook, a more global positioning. And this is happening at the same time as we see politics becoming very difficult.
But do you see the companies playing a role in giving back to society at a whole new scale, given that they have a whole new scale compared to the size of the nations?
Oh, absolutely. more and more companies are realizing that our current system doesn't allow them to be successful either. You know, there's no business case in enduring poverty. When you see more people going to bed hungry, when you see more geopolitical conflicts, when you see more disruptions in value chains as a result of climate change or destruction of biodiversity, when cost of goods are going up, when you have less and less access to some of the nature-based resources that you need to be successful, businesses are the first one that pay the price for it. When I was running Unilever, a big company admittedly, but we had probably already $400 or $500 million a year in extra cost as a result of climate change, supply chain disruptions being a big one of it. So business cannot succeed in societies that fail, nor do I believe that business can be a bystander in a system that gives them the right to exist in the first place. So business has always been there historically, if you go back, to attack the world's problems with innovations, with creativity, with resources. And business will, business has to increasingly not only be a key part of the solution, but it also has to be a key driver of helping governments function. Unfortunately, since the last 4 or 5 decades, we've seen countries growing more apart than together.
Yeah.
We're seeing different value systems emerge in the world. We're seeing that multilateral institutions that were formed in 1944 with the Bretton Woods agreements
are losing
that
power.
are not anymore functioning in today's world.
Yeah.
The issues of cybersecurity, the issues of climate change, the issues of pandemics are issues that concern the whole world. They don't know where the borders of countries are. It requires cooperation. And this has happened at a time that the world power is shifted to the south, to countries that were underdeveloped are now major economies, China being a good example of that. And many of these institutions don't reflect the current reality. So here is an opportunity for business. It's an opportunity for business to actually step into that void, be responsible, and de-risk a political process to ultimately ensure that we don't run off the rails.
And with that, in your book that you called Net Positive, you talk a lot about this concept that how the companies can contribute. Could you share a little bit with us what the net positive concept is?
Yeah.
And what is the role of a company given this concept and of a country, and especially the case of Brazil?
Yeah. And of individuals. It touches us at all levels, actually.
Okay, so individuals, companies, countries.
Which is the beauty of net positive. Individuals is also individual companies. But it is very simple concept. Business should profit from solving the world's problems, not from creating the world's problems. And you have to really ask yourself, in many cases, is the world really better off because this or that business is in it, yes or no? And it's difficult to answer for many companies. Right now, companies can operate freely in most parts of the world and benefit from enormous access to global economies, but they can run businesses in a way that they're not being held responsible for that total impact. And often that total impact actually has what people call, economists call negative externalities. You can cut down the forest and sell the wood and make money of it, but you're not being held accountable for the forest not being able anymore to give us oxygen. Or you can use a lot of water in your production processes to make from bottled water to drinks, but in any process you have water. The shampoos of this world, whatever you have, but you're not held accountable for polluting the water that comes out of your factories. That doesn't work. Business has to take responsibility of its total impact.
But in the book you say that total impact, it's a positive to people, planet, and business. What do you mean by that?
Oh, absolutely. So most businesses right now are in essence responsible, and they run what they call sustainability programs or corporate social responsibility. CSR is the term that is broadly used, and 95% of companies issue CSR reports. They know that they have to reduce their carbon emissions because climate change has too high a cost now. They know that they have to ensure that the plastic bottles don't end up in the ocean. They in essence know that it's bad to have continued deforestation in this world. So they're working very hard to be less bad. The argument of the book is very simple. At a time that we have overshot these planetary boundaries, when World Overshoot Day is August 2nd for Brazil, just to be less bad is not good enough anymore. Less bad is still bad. I used to kill 10 people, now I only kill 5 people. I'm not a better murderer. You're still an evil person.
Yes.
But that's what we do in companies,
Yes.
you see. We used to make it worse. Now we still make it worse, but a little bit less worse, but it's still worse.
Yeah.
So you need to change the mindsets and say to companies, really, there is an enormous future in thinking that positive, which basically is restorative, reparative, regenerative. If you look at nature, nature by essence is restorative, reparative. There's no waste in nature. Everything is being used. Nature actually grows. We talked about COVID, but how quickly nature came back when we left it alone was actually surprising. Also very encouraging.
Yeah.
So why do we have waste? Because we invented waste as human beings.
Yeah.
Basically a product of lazy thinking. We didn't have a problem with the waste because Mother Earth were compensating for it. Now Mother Earth doesn't compensate for it anymore. So we have a problem with our waste. So if we design waste, we can also undesign waste and move to more circular, regenerative thinking. And that's what nature does for us. And if we mimic that in business, it would be very good because we create environments then that blossom, that grow, that give opportunities to each of and all of us, solve issues like inequity or inequality, make more likely have countries work together instead of working against each other. Now you'll have the global refugees because of climate change. You have the wars because of water shortage. You have many of the issues because the poorer parts of the world's population doesn't have access anymore to products or often pay the higher price of climate change. Think about a world where you reverse that. That's a world we want to create, an inclusive, more equitable, more sustainable world. Think about replenishing our resources for future generations. So that's what companies need to think about. And the benefit that we now have is that the cost of not doing this has gone up so much, so quickly, that it's actually cheaper to fix the challenges than to continue to live with them.
You mentioned that a few times and even proving with numbers. You also mentioned the role of developing economies, what happened to China, and you've been coming a lot to Brazil. We are very happy for that.
Yes.
How do you see the role that Brazil could play in this global transformation?
Well, it happens to be, in my opinion, that Brazil is very, very well positioned in this global transition. First of all, it's one of the major countries in the world. It's number 5 or 6 now in terms of its economic weight, and obviously with a very bright future to further unlock that potential. Brazil itself has an opportunity to become a more inclusive and successful society. And it happens to be that most of the things we need to create this greener future, Brazil has an abundance of. You have an abundance of green energy here. Your grids are connected. 90% of your electricity is green. You have an abundance of critical minerals here that are needed in this transition to make batteries or others. You are having a blossoming agricultural sector. One of the byproducts or consequences of that has been sustainable biofuel. And these are hydrogen and other sources that we're looking for in the future. I think Brazil as a country is very well placed. And you've actually made investments. You're one of the major investors in wind and solar. As I said, you've electrified your grid. You have a biofuel industry that probably is more developed than most countries in the world. That gives you a head start already. So Brazil is well placed itself to unlock once and for all its own economy and put itself on a higher platform. And as I mentioned, that for companies it becomes a bigger economic opportunity to move in this direction. The same is true for countries. You have been instrumental in developing the ecological transition plan for Brazil. And it shows, like we see in many other countries in the world actually, not surprisingly, if you invest $150 billion a year, you can get a return that is up to $400 billion a year. You can create 10 million more jobs than you have currently, better jobs, higher quality jobs. In fact, you can double your economic growth and lifting a lot of people out of poverty. We see it in any country in the world where we do these deep decarbonization studies. you're equally important to help the rest of the world. I think there's an enormous opportunity for Brazil to play this leadership role. And for some reason, the stars are aligned. You have the G20 this year in Brazil, and you're taking that very seriously. Topics like sustainable transition, inclusive societies, making global institutions work are very high on the agenda of the G20. And then next year in Berlin, you have the COP30. COP30 is the Committee of Parties, which basically is an annual process to move our climate discussions forward and decarbonize our global economies. And again, Brazil, with its natural resources, with its advanced development already towards green energy, is a wonderful example for the south of the world, where for the first time a leading country from the south is setting an example. But it's also, I think, a wonderful country where Europe and the US will increasingly find very, very attractive investment opportunities. The world cannot get to its targets without Brazil. Brazil cannot get to its ambitions without unlocking this potential. And the ecological transition plan, undoubtedly we're going to learn a lot as we go on this trajectory, but is a shining example of the benefits of making this transition.
There are so many questions that I wanted to ask you, but I told you time flies once we get here, and I want to make sure that everybody listens to this podcast and watches us as well, because it's so many learnings to get from this conversation, from your book and from your trajectory as well. When you talk about Brazil, the companies as well, and all the decision-making process that we need to update in the world, sounds to me like we need to go for a major reset. And with that, we have leaders to guide us through this major reset. What are the main characteristics that you see that the leaders that will lead us through this net zero, net positive transformation should have for us to be successful? And as you said, adjusting scale and speed of this transformation. Yeah,
it's a very important question. During COVID, we saw two things. We saw a bifurcation in business models, that businesses that were run for the longer term, more purpose-driven, that put sustainability at the core of their strategy, were doing better than the businesses that were myopically focused on the next quarter and the shareholders only. But we also saw a bifurcation in leadership. Leaders with a higher level of empathy, compassion, humanity, humility, leaders with a strong sense of purpose, those that embraced partnership, that understood the power of cooperating around these enormous challenges that we have versus competing, leaders that took a longer term view and thought multi-generational. These were the leaders that people wanted to follow. At a time of a high level of angst, anxiety, mental issues and everything, engagement in companies is very low. But when you have a leader like that, that is a true human being, that actually lives the principles of putting themselves to the service of others, it creates an enormous following. It unlocks an enormous energy. So I always say the most important characteristic of a leader is to be a good human being, to understand that by putting yourself to the service of others, you're better off yourselves as well. But the characteristics now, without any doubt, is a high level of empathy, humility, a strong sense of purpose that guides you, a courage that unlocks potential in you that you didn't think that was there, and an ability to translate that by giving energy to others, unlocking energy in others, and forming these enormous partnerships, which are not easy to do, to drive these most wicked problems. This is a change that needs to happen that is well beyond the scale of the Industrial Revolution. And the time that we have is significantly shorter than a technological revolution. So it requires the best of all of us. So that's the type of leadership that we need. Unfortunately, in Brazil, in my many visits to this wonderful country, I've seen that we actually are blessed with an enormous amount of leaders, not least yourself. So if we can put them all together, as we were doing today with this Ambition 2030, that you did together with AYA and the UN Global Compact, and if we could multiply that a little bit to the scale of Brazil, that is enormous. And we had a wonderful talk this morning from Luisa
Trajano. Yes, she's amazing.
Who is a wonderful woman. But there you see how the power of one woman, and there are many of them in Brazil, and they are mainly women, but the power of one woman to convert. You know, the BEM mission, the Association de BEM,
Yes.
and helping
Alcione as well. Yes.
helping people be lifted out of poverty. It's an idea of a person that is able to convince others, that is in the background doing it, but moving it forward, that actually in their own way are transforming the lives of millions of people. And that's humanity at its best. The real billionaires are not the ones that have $1 billion in their bank account. The real billionaires are the ones that touch 1 billion people. And those are the ones we should celebrate. And we saw some wonderful examples of that today here.
Yes, many examples, and we hope that we open space for more of those. And I liked a lot, and I appreciate that you mentioned the value of female leadership on this journey. We definitely need more women in power, and I fully agree. Luisa, Trajano, Alcione, and so many others were very inspiring here. Every time we have podcasts here, in a way or another, we end up talking about empathy, compassion, also sense of purpose and collaboration. That's why, by the way, we created AYAPO, because at Systemic we have a chance to work on systems change and be super technical, but we also felt that we needed a place, both virtual and physical place, where people can meet and collaborate at a whole new level. We used to say that we are trying to reach exponential collaboration and partnerships at the CEO level, so that the leaders also create this network, this support network to go beyond, right? And
that's why I feel at home here.
Yes, please keep on coming back, because we
surprise,
also feel that you belong here. So again, I had so many questions to ask you, but I have one final question. That's a tradition of ours, the podcast called AYAOn. So we usually ask a last question that's more in the improvising mode. Everything in a podcast is more improvisation. That's why it's so fun and natural. But I wanted to ask you, what's on and what's off to you? And for us to end in a higher tone, if you can start with what's off and then what's on.
Well, what's off to me is that procrastination. One thing I got from my father is not having much sympathy for lazy people. I think the biggest human right is the right to take responsibility. And fortunately, we are amongst a small group of people that is able to make a big difference. If you have won the lottery ticket of life, which I have by having been born in the Netherlands, by having had an access to a toilet, to food, to not be stunted, sanitation, education, you only belong to 5% of the world's population. So then it's your duty, your obligation to put yourself to the service of others. So that's, for me,
what is off.
If people don't understand that and abuse the wonderful gifts that are given to them by being here on this planet Earth, then it's off for me if they don't go for their full potential.
And what's on?
What's on is the opposite. I've met with the foundations that my wife and I run and other things that we're involved in, tremendous amounts of people that often work for a pittance of a salary or no salary at all to help other people. One of my foundations is called the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust. We have visually impaired children, blind, deaf-blind people in schools. We fight for the right of everybody to be there. We call it unlocking their potential for life. And there are about 25,000 of them. And I see the teachers there often not getting paid, hardly having any salary if they get paid, but dedicating themselves sometimes 24 hours a day to these children, to give them the same opportunity that we take for granted. I see the mothers bringing them to school and wanting to be part of an integrated educational system. So that gives me energy. I go into the many countries in the world and I look at the farmers and I see many of the smallholder farmers who frankly still have the wrong end of the stick, and that's where you find most of the poverty with the monocrop farmers. But I see the women there working again as well. And if you invest in them, in their education, in financing, in giving them land rights, you just unlock a potential that frankly could feed the whole world. And so investing in those people, the world functions because it functions because of people, and that these communities make the difference. And the more we foster that, of course we need a global strategy and some guidelines, but the more we foster that community, and that requires frankly believing in the goodness of people. I believe we were all born with a little diamond inside, and it's our responsibility to make that shine in everybody. And when that shines and shines together, we can move mountains and change this world. There's no question about it.
Paul, no words to thank you enough for all your contribution, your dedication, your commitment. I see even your emotion every time you come here, which makes me especially grateful to everything that you're doing. And thank you for believing us as well in our teams and everything that we are doing together. It's really an honor to be here with you. Tá bem emocionante, gente, tá aqui, terminar esse episódio, porque o Fórum Ambição 2030, né, a gente tá falando que o nosso tempo tá acabando aqui, porque estamos correndo contra o tempo, precisamos ajustar a escala, a velocidade, o nível de colaboração. Tivemos uma aula de liderança, de compromisso aqui do Paul Polman. Começamos ouvindo sobre a trajetória pessoal dele, como ele foi terminar no mundo dos negócios e depois no mundo dos negócios aprendeu a relevância que as empresas têm, muitas vezes equiparáveis e agora até maiores que muitas nações, como as empresas podem trabalhar com esse conceito de impacto positivo, deixando um legado positivo para as pessoas, para o planeta e para os próprios negócios. Na frase dele, no livro, que chama Impacto Positivo, a grande provocação aqui é como as empresas podem ser corajosas, prosperando, mas dando mais do que tiram. Então fica aqui minha provocação para a gente. E você? Está dando mais do que você retira desse mundo? Afinal de contas, o Paul lembrou a gente aqui. O dia do overshoot da Terra é exatamente isso. Em agosto, no Brasil, a gente passa a consumir mais recursos do que a natureza e o planeta é capaz de devolver a vida, né, que esse planeta tem. Então, na prática, é isso. A gente precisa começar a retribuir, a contribuir, a regenerar mais do que a gente tira. Reflexão para você. Você está contribuindo mais do que o que você retira do planeta e em todos os sistemas que você participa? Vou terminar deixando um convite para os próximos episódios. Lembrando que essa é uma série especial, com 4 episódios sendo gravados ao mesmo tempo que acontece. O Fórum Ambição 2030, uma parceria do Fórum Global, do Pacto Global da ONU com a AYA. Muito obrigada por estar aqui com a gente e já tem mais AYAOn com vocês. Obrigada, Paul.
Obrigado.
Uma honra de novo estar aqui com você.
Obrigado. Gracias.